From the letter to the Hebrews, let mutual love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that some have entertained angels without knowing it. The King James Version of this passage uses the wonderfully poetic words, some have thereby entertained angels unawares. Have you noticed the angels in this cathedral? The stained glass windows are full of them. The reredos, the wood back here, every side of each of the pillars has angels going up of them, and each of those angels carries a different musical instrument. And if you look in the back chapel, the wood angels and the angels in the walls that are painted there are absolutely magnificent. Do you believe in angels? The builders of this cathedral certainly did. But what are angels? You have to know that in the Bible, angels aren't plump little cherubs. They're not Christmas pageant kids with halos and wings. And they're not some sort of fairy godmother or kind of guardian, the way that we're often taught to think. The biblical word for angel means messenger. And in the Bible, angels are most often experienced in the form of ordinary human beings who bring messages that other human beings need to hear. Now, I have to tell you, I'm not 100% clear about angels with halos and wings. But I do know that over the past few weeks, I've had several experiences of angels, that is, messengers, like the ones that Hebrews describes. The first experience was at Temple Baptist Church in Portland, Oregon, at the reception for my father-in-law's funeral. Now, Temple Baptist Church is the church where my wife Sherry grew up, and her family's been involved there for generations. And it's where we got married, and where we had the funeral for Sherry's brother and Sherry's mother, and now the reception for her dad. And as much as I have been there, I have to tell you that I've always felt like I was a little bit of an outsider. I knew that I had theology and politics and a way of reading the Bible and living my faith is very different than the people who made that place home. And I knew that for some, I was someone whose Christianity was perhaps a bit suspect, and if not suspect, in a little bit of competition maybe with theirs. But I'll tell you that when we first went over to that church the night before to kind of help set up for the reception, and then for the reception itself, my reception was completely different. It turns out that the ladies who did the funeral reception 2 weeks ago also did the reception for my wedding 33 years ago. And they welcomed me like one of their kids. They welcomed me like a member of the family. And as I was doing what I usually do, kind of helping set up and clean up and folding up chairs and, all that kind of stuff, they started talking to me. And they started sharing their journeys and sharing their fears, the stories of their congregation that had declined mightily during COVID, and their fears that they might have to sell their historic building in the center of town and move out somewhere they didn't know. And they talked about those fears, and then one pulled me aside and then said that her faith had been revived by going to a little Episcopal church around the corner at one of their noonday services during the week, kind of like we do here on Tuesday morning. And I have to tell you that I spent a lot of this summer, particularly after General Convention and hearing some of the issues in the wider church, worried worried about the future of the Episcopal Church in general, and of St. Luke specifically in the post-COVID world. A lot of those anxieties were kind of filling my heart. And I kind of look at some of the more evangelical churches, I think, oh, they're doing great. The message of that Baptist church kitchen team was that we're actually on the same team. That we're not alone, we are not alone in our COVID struggles. That many, in fact, most churches are going through the same thing. And that God is still with us. And then, in fact, the Episcopal Church is seen as a place and a people of hope. That was the first experience of angels, the first message. The second came from playing badminton with my younger brother and his kids in Seattle, where we went on the next phase of our journey. And I knew his kids when they were born, but then we all moved, so I haven't spent a lot of time with them. So we're just out there in his lawn and, playing together. But I have to tell you that when we first started playing, my side of the net was aggressive. At least it's as aggressive as you can get in badminton. I mean, I was doing things like trying to do hard-to-return serves and spiking that birdie right down to the gap between the other players on the other side and things like that. Now, I put spiking in text because it was badminton, after all. But you kind of get my point. And after a few minutes, my brother stopped. He stopped us playing. He said, the point is to hit it in a way that makes it easy for the other person to return, because what you want to do is have a volley, and that's what makes it fun. And if you don't do that, all you're going to do is spend a lot of time picking things up off the ground. Well, his words hit me like a ton of bricks. Like the ladies of Temple Baptist Church, my brother's comments made me think of how often even those of us in churches, approach life with an attitude of competition rather than cooperation. Forgetting that the real point is to do things gently in a way that makes it easy for others to join in, working together to volley rather than picking things up off the ground. Remembering that the whole reason that we're together is to have fun and to build in relationship and get to know and just enjoy being together. As we heard in this morning's gospel, it's not about claiming the most important seat in the banquet or needing to be the smartest person in the room. It's about enjoying the banquet and the others who are there. The final message I want to describe to you is from a French pastor, a woman, I think she's come to visit here, who I worked with in Paris some 30 years ago. She and her husband came to Maine to visit us last week. And in our conversation, she was reflecting back, and she told me that she was really thankful for things she had learned from the Episcopal Church that had made her ministry as a French pastor in the Église Réformée a success. And I asked her for an example, and she said, let me tell you about the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is an idea for self-care for pastors, for ministers. The idea is that you divide each day into thirds, a morning, an afternoon, and an evening, and you only work 2, not 3 of them. That means if you have an evening meeting, you don't come in until noon, and if you work 2 the morning and the afternoon, you don't work the evening, because you always want to give at least one of those slots to yourself, your family, or your friends. And on top of that model suggests that you take a break in between each section to have meals and to carve out time to pray. And I told her that I had been taught that too. In fact, I have taught that to others. But I said, I haven't lived it very well. And she said, well, you should. Otherwise, you get tired and burned out and aren't helpful to anyone. Well, that was an important message for me. I think it's an important message for all of us. Because as Jeremiah pointed out, there is serious work to do. Work to do that we can't do if we're fried, and work that we cannot do if we try to do it all on our own. I don't know about you, but when I heard the words of Jeremiah this morning, how God gave us this beautiful planet and we trashed it, I couldn't help but think of climate change. And how God gave us the science, the brains, the wisdom to understand what is going on, and yet we did nothing in return. It is, Jeremiah, is an indictment. But there is hope. And creative solutions will be possible if we work together. If we close our mouths long enough to listen to others, if we hear the message the angels of God are giving us, and have courage to respond. All the examples I gave you of angels so far are from people I know, but Hebrews is clear that God is more likely to speak to us actually through strangers. It says, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it. In his book, 5 Practices of a Fruitful Congregation, Robert Schnase lists what he calls radical hospitality as one of the most important things a healthy church can do. For Schnase, Christianity is radical hospitality because it forces people beyond their comfort zones. More than that, Christian hospitality is radical because it recognizes the stranger as Christ himself. And in that welcome gives a foretaste of the welcome that we all will receive in the kingdom of God. About 20 years ago, I was on a tour of the Middle East. I was in Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and in Israel. And in each of those places, my group experienced amazing hospitality, true Middle Eastern hospitality in incredible ways. We wandered through the souks, that is kind of an Arab market in Damascus at night, and we were greeted in English and welcomed into people's shops and invited into their homes for a glass of Turkish coffee, a hose on a hookah, and even some conversation. It was humbling for me as I reflect on that pre-9/11 world. As if the roles were reversed today, I'm not sure the same thing would happen here. If we were sitting on our porches at home and we saw strangers walking by not speaking English, would we invite them into our home for a meal? Would we invite those strangers into a home, into this home, into a meal right here? We say we are welcoming, and I think we are. But I wonder if you asked an immigrant or just a summer visitor to Portland or to St. Luke's, if they would agree. Would our actions be different if we remembered that the stranger, in fact, that everyone we meet could be an angel or Jesus himself? Notice how that passage from Hebrews begins by saying, let mutual love continue. Then after the bit about the angels, it talks about living out that love by caring for others who are in prison, by honoring marriage, being content with what we have. You see, this passage not only asks us to seek angels in others, it asks us to to be angels as well. And I want to wrap up this morning by mentioning a special person who's done this in amazing ways this summer. I have known Ray Cornelius for many years as a world-class musician, a true performer and a showman and a friend and supporter of St. Luke's and our music program here. But this summer, since May, I have been blessed and honored to know him, get to know him as a person. As our interim organist, Ray has blessed St. Luke's by sharing his music. He blessed St. Luke's by sharing his heart, his compassion and encouragement, and his most beautiful soul. And I want to say thank you, Ray. Thank you for giving us the message of the angels, both in music and in the way you became part of the life and ministry of this place. With Albert Melton, Harold Stover, and Christian Clough, who, by the way, begins tomorrow, St. Luke's has been blessed by the most amazing and gifted leaders in our music program. And it is a joy to have had you as part of this team. Thank you. You know, so I'm talking about angels. When Abraham Lincoln appealed to the better angels of our nature, he wasn't asking us to be supernatural people, supernatural beings, but rather ordinary people who did extraordinary things. He was calling us to be people whose difference made a difference, people who by their words and action brought God's message of hope and of love. Have you experienced angels without knowing it? Today's readings challenge us not just to see them for ourselves, but to be them for others as well. Amen.